In the freezing, fog-choked winter of 1861, a 19-year-old girl named Matilda Scheele lay in a cramped, drafty attic room in London, fighting a terrifying battle that no doctor could explain. Outside, aristocratic carriages clattered against the wet cobblestones, but inside, Matilda's desperate gasps for air broke the silence. For months, her job had been to manufacture the very illusions of luxury that those wealthy elites wore to signal their prestige. She was an artificial flower maker, one of the hundreds of young, impoverished girls in London's industrial slums who spent up to 18 hours a day painting, starching, and assembling artificial foliage for the grand London social season. Her weary hands had meticulously crafted thousands of brilliant, emerald green leaves that wealthy debutantes would pin to their hair and drape across their silk ball gowns to look like walking embodiments of spring. To the high society elite, this vibrant green was the ultimate symbol of life, freshness, and untamed natural beauty. But in Matilda's dark attic room, that same green had transformed into an invisible, slow-moving monster. Her skin had turned a sickly, jaundiced yellow. Her fingernails were decaying, peeling away from the flesh in dark, stained shades of emerald, and even the whites of her eyes had begun to glow with an unnatural, toxic green hue. In her final hours, her sanity evaporated entirely. She shrieked in terror, hallucinating that the green leaves she had crafted were crawling up her walls like giant, starving insects. When she finally succumbed, convulsing as a thick, dark green fluid poured from her mouth, a subsequent autopsy revealed a horrifying reality. Her lungs, liver, and kidneys were completely saturated with a deadly, heavy metal poison. Matilda had not simply died of exhaustion. She had been consumed, dissolved, and killed from the inside out by the very color she had spent her short life creating. This was the quiet, glittering, and deeply hypocritical tax of the Victorian era. Today, we live in a world completely saturated with color. We see it everywhere, stripped of its rarity and its divinity. But in the 19th century, color was the ultimate weapon of social division. It was a visual barrier that separated the ruling class from the dust of the streets, the gods of high society from the faceless masses of the slums. And at the pinnacle of this visual hierarchy stood a single, legendary wavelength of light, a shade of green so brilliant it seemed to capture the very essence of a fresh summer meadow. For the newly wealthy middle class and the old-world aristocracy, this green was not just an aesthetic choice. It was a physical manifestation of astronomical wealth and supreme taste. Yet behind the closed mahogany doors of those elegant green-walled drawing rooms, beneath the heavy layers of emerald silk dresses, a silent tragedy was unfolding. Ordinary people, in their desperate pursuit of a status they could never truly afford, were systematically sacrificing their health, their sanity, and their lives to a beautiful, deceptive illusion. To understand how a simple visual frequency could drive an entire society into a state of collective madness and physical decay, we must look beyond the bright lights of the Victorian ballroom. We must look across the sea to a quiet laboratory in Sweden, where an accidental chemical breakthrough unleashed a beautiful green-painted monster upon the world. For centuries, green had been the great frustrating failure of the artistic and textile worlds. While nature washed the earth in an infinite variety of greens, humanity possessed no reliable way to capture that vibrancy. The green pigments available to European dyers, made from ground malachite or unstable yellow and blue mixtures, were highly fugitive. Within months, these traditional greens would react with light and moisture, slowly fading and decaying into a dull, muddy brown. Many Renaissance masterpieces, which today depict gloomy, dark landscapes, were originally painted as bright, clear summer scenes. They were ruined by the chemical decay of cheap, unstable green paints. The world was starving for a permanent, light-fast green. The elite craved a color that could allow them to drape themselves in the eternal freshness of nature, a pigment that would not betray their wealth by fading into the gray dirt of ordinary life. The miracle they had been praying for finally arrived in 1775, not from a master artist's studio, but from the cluttered, chemical-stained laboratory of a brilliant Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele. Scheele was experimenting with the properties of arsenic, a heavy metal that was already known to be highly toxic, but was widely used in small doses for metallurgy and glassmaking. By heating sodium carbonate, adding arsenious oxide, and then mixing the solution with copper sulfate, Scheele triggered a beautiful chemical reaction. As the liquid swirled and settled, an incredibly bright, yellowish-green precipitate began to form at the bottom of his glass beaker. It was copper arsenite. But to the eyes of the industrial world, it was a miracle. It was a green of unparalleled intensity, far brighter than any pigment humanity had ever created. It was cheap to produce, extraordinarily stable, and completely resistant to the fading effects of sunlight. Scheele, fully aware of the lethal nature of the chemicals he had blended, wrote letters to his colleagues warning them of the pigment's dangerous properties. He would later die in his early 40s, his health shattered by his habit of smelling and tasting the chemical compounds he discovered. But in the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the warnings of a Swedish chemist were easily ignored. The world had found its perfect green, and they called it Scheele's green. By the early decades of the 19th century, Scheele's green and its later, even more vibrant successor, emerald green, developed in Bavaria in 1814, had become an absolute global sensation. It was the it color of the Victorian age. The pre-Raphaelite painters used it for their tragic muses, while the emerging middle class rushed to buy cheap wallpaper decorated with the brilliant pigment. As rapid industrialization choked cities with coal smoke and trapped millions in grey slums, a deep, nostalgic yearning for nature swept through society. Wallpaper became the ultimate escape. Home decorators covered their drawing rooms, dining halls and bedrooms in elaborate, ornate floral patterns of ivy, ferns, peacock feathers, and tropical leaves, all printed with the magnificent emerald green. The natural world was no longer outside. It was brought indoors, plastered onto the very walls of the home. A collective blindness that saw an entire society wrap itself, its children, and its homes in a highly concentrated, lethal poison. In the wallpaper printing shops of London, impoverished workers spent their days surrounded by clouds of toxic copper arsenite dust. The children employed in these workshops, known as dusting girls or bronzing boys, would return home covered from head to toe in a fine green powder. Their hair fell out in clumps, their skin erupted in deep, painful ulcers, and their fingernails rotted away. Yet their suffering was entirely invisible to the consumers who bought their products. The profit margins of the green industry were astronomical, and the lives of poor slum children were cheap. At its peak, a single London manufacturer used over 2 tons of raw arsenic every week to print its designs. Just 1 square foot of these green wallpapers contained enough arsenic to kill 5 healthy adults. It was a beautiful, aristocratic masquerade where the elites paraded their wealth, completely oblivious to the fact that their garments were weeping a slow, agonizing poison. But the physical danger of the dye was only one part of the tragedy. The true psychological horror of emerald green was unlocked inside the damp, unventilated, and tightly sealed homes of the Victorian middle class. For decades, doctors across Britain and Europe were baffled by a mysterious, lingering illness that seemed to target wealthy, comfortable families. The symptoms were erratic and deeply disturbing. It would begin with a persistent dry cough, followed by inflamed eyes, a chronically raw throat, and painful skin lesions. But the most insidious impact of the disease was psychological. The victims began to suffer from an overwhelming, unexplained fatigue, a heavy, suffocating brain fog that made the simplest decisions feel impossible. Deep, dark depressions, sudden fits of paranoia, and vivid, terrifying hallucinations began to take hold of their minds. Small children, who spent their days playing on the carpets of green-walled nurseries, were the first to decline. They would be seized by sudden, violent convulsions, wasting away until they died of what local doctors diagnosed as brain fever. or acute hysteria. The true horror of this domestic poisoning lay in its complete invisibility. In the cold, rainy climate of Victorian Britain, homes were notoriously damp. To combat the cold, families burned coal stoves, lit gas lamps, and kept their windows tightly shut. This created a warm, humid, and stagnant indoor climate, the perfect breeding ground for domestic molds. What the Victorians did not know was that a household mold, Penicillium brevicoli, digested the starch paste on the walls. As the mold digested the starch paste, it came into contact with the copper arsenite in the green dye, converting the solid arsenic into a highly volatile, toxic gas known as trimethylarsine, or Gogio gas. Unlike the flaking dust from the wallpapers, this gas was completely odorless, colorless, and highly airborne. Their sanctuary of safety was converted into a slow-acting gas chamber. The psychological disintegration of a family under the influence of this invisible gas was slow, agonizing, and deeply tragic. Imagine a comfortable, well-to-do family gathering for Sunday dinner in their beautiful emerald green dining room. The steam from the hot food and the tea increases the humidity in the room, warming the cold walls and activating the microscopic molds sleeping behind the paper. As the family eats and laughs, the walls silently weep the odorless Gogio gas, filling the room with a concentrated vapor of arsenic. Over several hours, the atmosphere begins to shift. The mother, once a cheerful and gentle woman, becomes irritable, anxious, and deeply paranoid. She complains of a constant metallic taste, weeping and convinced her servants of poisoning her. Her children sit listlessly in the corner of the nursery, their eyes bloodshot and swollen, whispering that the shadows on the green walls are moving, trying to reach out and pull them into the plaster. The father, returning home from a long day at his office, feels a heavy, crushing weight on his chest. His thoughts become scattered and confused. He suffers from sudden, unprovoked outbursts of violent rage, followed by a deep, paralyzing paranoia that his business partners are plotting his ruin. The family is losing its mind, but because the poison is completely invisible, they have nothing to blame but each other. They consult the finest doctors in London, who prescribe rest or sea air that only worsens their condition. The true source of their madness, the beautiful, prestigious green walls that frame their lives, remains completely unsuspected. When they holiday by the sea, their health miraculously improves. But the moment they return to their villa, the trap snaps shut once more. Within days, the headaches return, and the children begin to waste away. It was a cyclical, cruel, and inescapable prison. A system that destroyed the minds of its victims while they worshipped the very walls that were killing them. This slow domestic descent into madness was the exact physical reality behind Charlotte Perkins Gilman's famous 1892 feminist masterpiece, The Yellow Wallpaper. In the story, a woman is confined to a room with appealing wallpaper by her well-meaning doctor husband, only to gradually lose her mind as she imagines a trapped woman crawling behind the patterns. While critics analyzed the story as a pure metaphor for the oppressive nature of Victorian marriage, it was actually a literal depiction of a common physical phenomenon. The gas released by arsenical wallpapers caused severe neurological damage, leading to vivid hallucinations, deep paranoia, and mental decay. Victorian families were quite literally being driven mad by their own wallpaper. One of the most tragic and well-documented cases of this domestic poisoning was recorded by a prominent London doctor, Thomas Orton. Dr. Orton was called to the home of a wealthy, respectable family named the Turners, whose 4 young children had fallen ill with a mysterious wasting sickness. Their eyes were constantly swollen. They suffered from excruciating headaches, and they wept in terror at night, claiming that the walls of their bedroom were breathing and trying to choke them. Dr. Orton spent weeks examining the home, searching for the source of the tragedy. Yet the children died one by one, their small bodies racked by convulsions. Dr. Orton, desperate for answers, began to meticulously document the physical features of the nursery. The only common link between the 4 deceased children was the wall of their bedroom, which was covered in a luxurious, expensive emerald green wallpaper. Orton's subsequent public warnings confirmed what a few ignored medical pioneers had been whispering for years. The Victorian home was a death trap, and the color of prestige was the killer. Yet the acceptance of this truth was met with a wall of industrial denial, class-based disbelief, and scientific arrogance. When doctors published their findings in The Lancet and other prestigious medical journals, the response from the wallpaper manufacturers was one of fierce denial and mockery. The green dye industry was worth millions of pounds, and they were not about to let a few alarmist doctors ruin their profits. They argued that arsenic was only deadly if it was directly ingested, famously mocking the medical reports by claiming that no sensible person would lick their own walls. They hired their own expert chemists to publish fraudulent studies, asserting that the green papers were completely safe, and that the deaths were actually caused by bad air or the genetic weakness of the families themselves. Even some of the most progressive, artistic, and nature-loving figures of the era were complicit in this denial. William Morris, the legendary designer, whose intricate, nature-inspired wallpapers are still celebrated today, used these arsenical green dyes extensively in his famous designs. Morris's reluctance to accept the danger was driven by a dark financial conflict of interest. His family's massive wealth was derived from their shares in the Devon Great Consols copper mine, one of the largest arsenic mines in the world. The miners in Morris's mines died by the hundreds, their lungs destroyed by the arsenic that colored his wallpaper designs. Yet when customers wrote to Morris's company expressing concern about the safety of his green wallpapers, Morris dismissed them with arrogant contempt. In an 1873 letter to a close friend, he wrote, "As to the arsenic foolishness, a more baseness panic can hardly be imagined. I think all this noise is just a delusion of the doctors." For Morris, the aesthetic beauty of his designs was more important than the lives of the faceless children who slept in those rooms. It was a tragic testament to how easily status can blind even the most enlightened minds. But the breaking point finally came in 1861, with the public, agonizing death of 19-year-old Matilda Scheele. Unlike the wealthy victims whose deaths were quietly brushed under the rug by private family doctors to avoid social scandal, Matilda died in a public workshop, and her autopsy was conducted by an honest, unbribable coroner. The gruesome details of her final hours, the green vomit, the emerald eyes, and the decaying green skin, were published in sensational detail across the London newspapers. For the first time, the wealthy ladies of high society were forced to look at their own beautiful green ball gowns and realize that the vibrant color they wore was literally stained with the blood of the young girls who made them. The public backlash was swift and overwhelming. Debutantes refused to wear the green dresses, and merchants were left with thousands of unsold rolls of emerald wallpaper. But the final fatal blow to the monopoly of the green stone came from the very top of the social hierarchy. In 1879, Queen Victoria was hosting a visiting foreign dignitary at Buckingham Palace. During his stay, the diplomat fell suddenly and violently ill, suffering from severe vomiting, headaches, and acute physical collapse. The royal physicians discovered that the walls of his royal suite were covered in a magnificent, expensive emerald green wallpaper. Furious, Queen Victoria ordered that every single roll of green wallpaper in Buckingham Palace be immediately torn down. The Queen's decisive move shattered the social prestige of the color forever. If the monarch would not allow green in her home, it was no longer a symbol of status and wealth. It was a symbol of danger, vulgarity, and death. Within a decade, emerald green was completely abandoned, remembered not as the color of nature, but as a green-dyed monster that had terrorized an entire century. The collapse of the green craze marked a permanent shift in humanity's relationship with color. As we look back from our modern, sterile world, we wonder how an entire society could have been so blind to such an obvious danger. But the truth is, we never truly escaped the trap of status. We simply changed its color. In the late 20th century, in our rush to escape the dangerous, explosive vibrancy of the past, we swung to the opposite extreme, today the design world is dominated by millennial grey, sad beige, and sterile clinical whites. We have traded the lethal vibrancy of our ancestors for a safe, sanitized neutrality. Our offices, homes, and digital spaces are designed to be as harmless, quiet, and non-threatening as possible. But in doing so, we have also lost something precious. We have lost our visceral, emotional connection to the physical materiality of color, the very connection that our ancestors were willing to sacrifice their minds, their health, and their lives to capture. When we look back at the history of toxic green, we are reminded of a time when color was a matter of life and death. It was a testament to our endless pursuit of status, our desire to lift ourselves out of the industrial mud, even if that touch was a slow, agonizing poison. Carl Wilhelm Scheele's green was a mirror that reflected the deepest ambitions of the human soul. It showed how easily we can turn a beautiful wavelength of light into a weapon of social exclusion, how easily we can ignore the suffering of others to preserve our own comfort, and how tightly we will cling to our illusions of prestige, even when the very walls of our sanctuary are whispering our doom. As we close this dark, toxic chapter on the color of kings, we must prepare ourselves for a different kind of survival. A survival that took place not in the elegant drawing rooms of London, but in the muddy, blood-stained trenches of global empires, where the proud armies of the world were forced to swallow their pride, strip away their bright colors, and drench their uniforms in the mud and tea of a new, invisible era.